Good morning, and may I welcome you all to the Virtual Planning and Development Management Committee for the 9th of March 2021. I welcome you all, if I may. I have some apologies in front of me. As you can obviously appreciate, I have an apology from Councillor McCall and also Councillor Waters, with substitutions, Councillor Ahern for Councillor McCall and Councillor Drysdale for Councillor Waters. I've also got a further apology for Councillor McEwen as well, but I'm not sure if we have a substitute. Danny, do we have anybody substitute for him?
I'm afraid we haven't got a substitute for Councillor McEwen, Bob. Okay.
We haven't. Okay, fine. Okay, thank you very much. That wasn't clear, but
also,
thank you.
I'm just going to have to leave the meeting. I'm sorry. Okay, it's I'm going to have to call an ambulance for my father-in-law. Okay.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Okay, if I may, I'll introduce the virtual top table. First of all, I have Mr. Christian Smith, Development Management and Building Standards Service Manager, Mr. Jamie Scott, Team Leader, Mrs. Anne Conliffe, Team Leader, Mr. Jeff Fogg, Legal Manager, and Mr. Danny Williams from Committee Services. Members are reminded that if you leave the meeting, as Michael has, during the consideration of any application, you are unable to participate or vote on that item when you return to the meeting. Unfortunately, this also means that if a member loses their internet connection during the consideration of an item, they should not vote on that item. Please advise the clerk via the meeting chat that you are leaving the meeting, or if you've lost your connection and therefore unable to vote on an item. For the proceeding today, can I remind you all to use the chat box? I obviously can't see everybody on the screen, and we have the usual procedure of C for comment, Q for question, and obviously M for motion, A for amendment. I'm now going to ask Mr. Williams to do a roll call to check that we are all present. Mr. Williams.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Brown, and good morning, everyone. When I call out your name, if you can let me know whether you're present, that would be most appreciated. So, Councillor Barnacle.
Present.
Councillor Brown, we've heard from yourself. Councillor Gray.
Present.
Councillor Illingworth.
Present.
Councillor James.
Present.
Councillor Purvis.
Present.
Councillor Reid.
Present.
Councillor Simpson.
Present.
Councillor Wilson.
Present.
Okay, and to substitute, say Councillor Ahern.
Present.
And Councillor Drysdale.
Yep, present.
Thank you. Obviously, we did have, as we all heard, Councillor Williamson was in the meeting, but he's had to leave. So that should be everyone who should be here is present. Thanks,
Danny. I think Councillor Williamson will come back in at some stage, and obviously he'll be allowed to deal with whatever case is the next one up. But we'll deal with that when we come to it. May I ask members any declarations of interest on this occasion? If you put DI in the chat box, that will be appreciated. I'll just hang on for a second. And nothing's coming through. So we'll move on to the next part, which is the question of deputations. We have 3 deputations this morning. Are we happy to hear those? They will be for 522, 523, and we have somebody here for 524, but they're here only to answer any questions. Are we happy with the situation? Anybody not? Please put in the chat box. Otherwise, I'll assume we're happy with deputations. Nothing happening there. Thanks, Councillor Wilson. And last thing before we start the agenda, are we happy to approve the minutes of the last committee meeting on the 13th of January? Unless I hear anybody argue the point on the chat box, I'll assume we all agree to it.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. So, members, we have 1 major application this morning and 4 local ones. So we'll start with the major application. This is the item 411. It is S42 application to modify condition 13 water crossings on plan permission 18/01214 AMM, and I believe Mr. Scott is going to introduce this. So over to you, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Convener. I'll take committee through some stills providing an overview of the proposal and some photographs illustrating the site and its context. This still confirms the location of the site, which is roughly 750 metres east of Aelith on land formerly forming part of Glen Isla Golf Course. The site is accessed via Aelith by the B952, which is the public road to the north. Firstly, to clarify, the application doesn't propose any physical change to the previously approved scheme and only a change to Planning Condition 13 to alter the construction programme for the delivery of water crossings, bridges, as these are not considered requisite for the current phases being built. And I'll take you through the overall development master plan and highlight the progress made so far with the development. This still shows the approved layout and design of phase 1. That's the part of the master plan which is identified in red on the upper left-hand corner. As noted in Paras 17 of the report, the whole site covered by this master plan was given planning permission in principle in June 2016. The whole site extends to 51 hectares and, as is advised, it's just to the east of Aelith. So that phase 1, as I've referenced earlier, it was given detailed approval in April 2019 for a 60-bed care home, 20 dwellings, 3 employment units. Phase 2, which is the area to the southeast of that, highlighted in pink on the plan there, it's currently subject of a planning application pending determination, which is seeking permission for 55 dwellings, and that's application reference 20/00511/AMM as referenced in the site history in the report. That will be presented to committee in due course. I'll now take you to an aerial photograph which was taken last week by the developer, which shows the progress with the development. So this is taken from the western boundary of the site. So the care home is under construction and is visible in the immediate foreground, with continued progress being made with the structure. So 2/3 of it is largely complete and the roofing is underway. The latter section, which you see to the right hand side of the shot, the kit is on order and it will be commenced as the next part of the development. The 20 dwellings that have been approved within phase 1 are located immediately beyond, and these are nearing completion or all but complete. We're now back to the aerial location plan. So just to summarise, significant investment continues to be made in this project, demonstrating the developer's commitment to its completion of the care home and the wider scheme as required by the planning permission in principle. The proposed change to condition 13 to change the timing of the bridges would not alter the time taken to complete the care home or be necessary for occupation of houses approved within phase 1. The funding of the dwelling sales within phase 1 is recognised as being necessary to deliver the care home and the wider site infrastructure. Therefore, allowing these dwellings to be occupied in advance of the crossings is considered acceptable, and that meets one of the key objectives of the planning permission in principle. And that concludes the stills, convener.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. We have no deputations on this, so I'll open straight up for questions for officers. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, convener. I'm on page 1 of the report, first of all, and this is a serious question on the paragraph 1, in line 2. It refers to the village of Aelith. I thought Aelith was a town, and I'm not sure what the definition of village is. If it is a village, it's a very big one, but it was a former borough. And I don't raise that any other than in a serious manner. On the same page, page item 3, where it quotes the existing condition, and a freeboard to mitigate against bridge blockage. Is a plain English version of that, because I think that's a technical term, and if we're to approve this today. And I gather from the report, and I think I'm just asking for confirmation, that both SEPA and our flood team are content with the proposed revised wording, and that they're content that the effect of that will be appropriate. Thank you.
Mr. Scott, I think you want to answer that one.
Yeah, just firstly to acknowledge that it is a settlement and it is a town, so I apologise for the oversight in respect of the reference to village. In terms of the condition that's proposed, you are correct that we have consulted with SEPA and our flooding team. Essentially, the technical detail for the temporary crossings has been approved and they're in place. The condition as amended would allow delivery of the permanent structures, so that detail is again already approved and SEPA are okay with it. So it solely comes down to timing, so it's really a planning judgment as to when those permanent bridges take effect. Because they're not needed for phase 1 because it can be accessed directly off the public road, it's appropriate to allow it to be considered on a later phase. In terms of your query on freeboard, I'll pass you to Gavin Bissett, who can just clarify a plain English reference of what that means.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Just to clarify, the freeboard that would be applied is an additional 600 millimetres of height above the 200-year flood level plus climate change level. So it's basically the 200-year flood level plus an allowance for climate change plus an additional 600 millimetres to reach the base level for the bridge.
Thank you.
Thank you. No other questions, Councillor Wilson? No, I can see. There's no other questions coming through. I'll give it a few more seconds. Okay. Then, if I may, I will. Councillor Barnacle, you have a question.
Thanks, convener. Just responding to Gavin Bissett's comment on 600 millimetres, does he regard that as a totally adequate increase given our experience of recent quite periodic heavy rainfall due to climate change? Does he regard the 600 millimetres as an adequate height?
Mr. Bissett, you want to answer?
Yep. Yes, Councillor Barnacle. The 600 millimetre freeboard is an additional allowance basically to capture model uncertainty. It's not an exact science calculating flood levels, so it's to allow for the various uncertainties that are inherent in that process, and that is the council's standard requirement for setting bridge crossing levels to include that 600 mil freeboard. So yes, we consider that is adequate on top of the existing flood levels that we also require.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see no other questions. So, Councillor Gray, you wanted to?
Yes, thank you, convener. This is a
We've lost you. Councillor Gray, we've lost you. I don't know if you've gone on to mute or. Have we lost Councillor Gray?
Convener, it appears Councillor Gray's still in the meeting and he's not on mute, so I'm not overly sure what's happened there. Maybe one of our IT colleagues might be able to have a look at that. I don't just want to hold on for a second.
I'll hold on for a second to see if he can come back in. If not,
if I can just say, convener, I know that Councillor Gray has had difficulties with his mute button in recent days.
Right. Okay. Okay. Then let me move on. Councillor James, do you want to move the motion, and we'll get somebody else to second it?
Yeah, absolutely, convener. I mean, an element of common sense. I'm assuming that Councillor Gray was going to say pretty much the same thing. An element of common sense applied here. There's no change to the plan as such, just the timing of it. And if it means that the project can go ahead and we can get these houses built and the care home, I think we should go with the recommendation before us. Thanks very much, convener.
Thank you very much. I have two people seconding, but Councillor Reid, you came in first. Do you want to second?
Yes, convener, more than happy to second.
Fine, thank you very much. I'm not seeing any amendments coming up, so I'll ask if there's anybody who wants to make an additional comment. No, then we will assume we've passed the paper. So that paper has now been approved, and we will move on to the next one, which is number 421. This is a part change of use from dwelling house to dwelling house and events venue, Auchterarder House in Auchterarder. And Mr. Smith is going to introduce the paper.
Thank you, Vice Convener. We'll just move to the slides now, and here we see a proposal to use a large detached dwelling house known as Auchterarder House in part as an events venue. The property formerly operated as a hotel before reverting back to a dwelling a number of years ago. No alterations are proposed to the building, and existing access arrangements will be used. And to give a sense of the situation, I'll now take you through some images showing the location, layout of the property and photographs of the access and building itself. This first shot is an aerial photograph which shows the extensive site highlighted in red, with Auchterarder House itself fairly centrally situated. Next, we see a site plan on the left reflecting the outline in the previous slide, and where you can see the positioning of Auchterarder House in the centre. To the right are the floor plans of the house, although, as I said, no alterations are proposed, and the primary use of the property is to remain as a house. Now turning to a series of photographs, we here have an image which shows access to Auchterarder House from the south, that access just beyond and to the right of the red car. The next photo, we then see a view from the opposite direction with the access to the left and beyond the property known as North Lodge. The third photo shows the gates serving that access, which you will note are set well back from the public road. Then we have two images of Auchterarder House itself. This image fairly close and showing the main entrance, and secondly a subsequent access over a raised garden area. That concludes the presentation, and we return to the site plan and floor plans. Thank you, Vice Convener.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Again, we have no deputations on this one, so I'll open for questions. And Councillor Wilson, you have a question.
Thanks, Convener. I was hoping we might have seen in the pictures a wee bit more of what I'm going to ask a question about, but I'm on page 46 of the papers, paragraph 41 and 42 particularly, and I've certainly got parking question mark. It was obvious from the front view that Mr. Smith showed if there was an area of parking at the front. There may be some additional parking, but I've kind of two questions about this. One is that the number of guests that are likely to come and be accommodated at the functions, and secondly, where the details of parking or transport arrangements for people to get there. And given, I think the other point about accessibility is we saw very clearly that the road has no pavements, and I'm just wondering if folk are going to arrive for any of the functions on foot or by. I don't think there's a bus service on the road, but they are a regular bus service, but whether it be dropped off by minibus or taxis, and what the arrangement would be for road safety given that there are no pavements. Thank you.
Mr. Smith, I think you want to answer first.
Yeah, I'll take that first. Again, I think looking at this shot we've got in front of us here, this is a house, and the anticipated levels of attendees at events can range anywhere from small single figures to a more modest number, around about 20 or so. It's anticipated that the arrangements that are in place will allow for management of parking along what is a fairly extensive area to the front of the property, but also a very long driveway. So individual arrangements I would anticipate would take place to manage the fairly modest number of guests that would be attending this property on the modest number of days that it's proposed to operate. In terms of access by other means of transport, I think given the location of this, it's not likely that people will walk to it, nor use a bus service, rather like any other operation of a similar type in a semi-rural location, and of the scale that this will be events, and people will make arrangements to get there under their own steam or in relation to being taken there by arranged transport. So I'm not sure if that answers all your questions, Councillor Wilson, or whether my roads colleagues have any further.
I don't really have anything further to add to that, Christian. We've looked at the parking provision. We feel it's adequate. In terms of road safety, I agree. It's unlikely that visitors will arrive by any other means. It's a long, narrow, private access track. We are happy with the access with the junction with the B8062. We have no issues with this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Barnacle, you have a question.
Thanks, convener. Having visited the site and studied the report, I have no issue with the in principle paragraph 28 recommendation for approval regarding Auchterarder House as an events venue. However, I do have 5 questions for officers. I don't know whether, convener, you want me to deal with them individually or just list them all together.
If you can just do the first 3, I'll ask somebody else and come back to you so we can give other people a chance to question if we may.
Thank you. First of all, I'm questioning paragraph 2 on the intention to bring 3 related applications to the same committee originally, but not doing so here, and I'm wondering why. It is suggested they can operate independently, and yet the noise impact assessment looks at the combined impacts of the related proposals. That's in paragraph 33. So that's the first question. The second question, paragraph 36 states there are no conditions considered necessary, but then the report contains 3 in the recommendation, possibly relating to both venues. That's the stables as well. This is confusing. And the third question, can I also have clarity around the number of days or events in a calendar year per paragraph 39? The number of days maximum is 30. However, the regulatory service manager states a condition for both stables and main house venues to a total of 30. One could have 2 events on a day, for example. So again, confusion. So what's the position there? I've 2 other questions, but I'll wait on those.
Okay. I'll come back to you on that. So, Mr. Smith, will you be able to start us off on that?
Yes, of course. But I'd really like to ask Councillor Barnack if he could ask each question individually. So if you could ask question 1 again, please. It was quite extensive what you said there, and I don't feel I'd be able to answer them one after another without having them repeated. Sorry.
Certainly, Christian. First question was querying paragraph 2 on the initial intention to bring 3 related applications to the same committee, but not doing so here. So I wondered about that. And it is suggested they can operate independently, and yet the noise impact assessment looks at the combined impacts of the related proposals per paragraph 33.
Yeah, I think there's maybe a couple of questions there. So the first one is, why have they not been brought together? And as set out in paragraph 2, this application is a separate application. It isn't necessarily related other than through ownership to the other application, which isn't in a position to be reported on yet. As it says, we are still waiting on some information on that. So to avoid any delay unnecessarily, we felt that this application could be brought forward and determined on its merits in a robust way. Second part of that question relates to there seems to be some confusion as to why the application can be brought forward given that the noise assessment covers both venues. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. If you then look at the detail of the noise assessment and the way in which that's been considered, you can look at them separately and you can look at them combined. And in this case, we have looked at Auchterarder House on its own merits in the context of the noise assessment, and given the way in which the noise assessment has been undertaken, that it has done a combined assessment, we have applied a condition to limit the number of events to 30 days, such that that would align with the terms of the noise assessment, but without linking it intrinsically to the stables application, which is separate, if that answers that question.
Yes, thanks. The second question was paragraph 36 states no conditions are considered necessary, but then the report contains 3 in the recommendation. Presumably, does that possibly relate to both venues? I just wanted confirmation on that because I thought it was confusing.
Well, again, that paragraph needs to be read in the context that's set. So that's only relating to Auchterarder House and noise associated to it relative to the scenarios set out in the noise assessment. However, again, as I said a second ago, I do appreciate it can be a little confusing because the noise assessment has looked at both venues and the combined impacts associated to them. So what we have done there in terms of conditions is apply a condition limiting it to 30 days, so no more events other than during those 30 days, such that it can align with the way in which the noise assessment has been undertaken. Should the applicant wish to undertake activities in Auchterarder House on more than 30 days, then they would need to undertake a further noise assessment to look at the impacts individually of Auchterarder House. So there's a condition relating to noise there. The other conditions are relating to various other matters and considered appropriate, if that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks. That leads me to the third one, what you said there, because I was looking for clarity around the number of days or events in a calendar year per paragraph 39. The number of days maximum is 30, as you've stated. However, the regulatory service manager states a condition for both stables and main house venues to a total of 30, but one could have 2 events on a day, for example. So I was just seeking clarity on that point. Is it 30 days or 30 events?
It's 30 days, and the reason for that is that clarity in the condition. I think as you're aware, there are 5 tests required to be passed by each and every condition, and one of those is clarity. So I think there is an element of clarity as to what a day is. However, there is not that same clarity in terms of what an event is. So we've had a discussion with our colleagues in environmental health who are comfortable with that position. So if there was any questions raised over activities undertaken at the property, a day is far easier to understand than an event.
Thanks very much, Christian.
Thank you, Councillor Barnacle. I'll come back to you at the end with the other questions. So, Councillor Simpson, you have a question.
Thank you very much, Convener. Two, if I may. Firstly, following on from Councillor Barnacle, just to be absolutely clear, in paragraph 2 on page 39, line 8, it says that the separate venues might operate independently, and I realise we're not considering the other 2 today, but am I right in thinking, just to be absolutely clear, given there's going to be a backlog of weddings and other dues after the pandemic, could we have 3 functions at the same time? Is that a possibility that we would need to consider in the future? Just
in relation to this application, we're only looking at activities at Auchterarder House. Any combined nature of activity with the proposals at the stables will be dealt with through that application. So again, Auchterarder House, if you're aware of it, Councillor Simpson, and it's set out in the plans there, it's, albeit a large house, it is modest in scale in terms of an events venue, and we have looked at that very carefully and feel that activity at that property can be undertaken subject to the controls that are in place, which to an extent reflect the fact that the noise assessment looks at both the potential of activity at this property, but also at the stables.
Right, that's right. Thank you very much. And my further question relates on the same page to paragraph 5. I see that the applicant was not required to undertake any formal pre-application consultation. Had all three been taken together, would that have had to take place?
It's really a rhetorical question, I suppose. It's not something that needs to be considered here. The fact is, what we're looking at here is a change of use of an existing building, which is not subject to undertaking pre-application consultation as required by the hierarchy of applications regulations.
Happy with that, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gray, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry I was off there and I realised I wouldn't be able to vote on this. A small question regarding the number of days again. This house can have events over a weekend. Is that 1 day or 2 days?
Well, my understanding that anything other than a Monday or a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Thursday or a Friday or a Saturday or a Sunday is 1 day. So if it was a Friday and a Saturday, that is 2 days. If it was a Friday, a Saturday and a Sunday, that is 3 days.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. There's no other questions coming through, so I'll come back to you, Councillor Barnacle.
Thanks, convener. The two other questions. Paragraph 41 refers to the potential of other access routes than the B8062, and I know that to be the case. And some of these other access routes may be known to attendees. What is to stop those other routes being used? That's the question. And then the other question is, finally, if we approve this report today, does that mean that the separate application regarding the stables, which I suspect may have more grounds for objection, will inevitably proceed? That's the two questions.
In relation to the first question, it's quite clear what the access to this property is, or the primary access. What the paragraph is alluding to is that there are other ways that you can reach Auchterarder House, but they are secondary ways and via other locations. There's nothing that we can do to stop people using that, but I would anticipate, and I think it is quite clear, that the primary access would be what everyone that knows where they're going will be using. There are other ways that you can reach Auchterarder House, but they are secondary ways and via other locations. Can you repeat your second question, Councillor Barnacle? Apologies.
Yeah, thanks, Christian, for that answer. My final point was, if we approve this report today, does that mean that the separate application regarding the stables, which I suspect may have more grounds for objection, will inevitably proceed?
If you mean by inevitably proceed, will automatically be approved as a result of a decision taken here today, the answer to that is no. That application will be considered on its own merits, as this one will be.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. And now, Councillor Reid, you have a question.
Thank you, convener. My question is regarding without doubt, the confusion that has been created by the fact that there are two other applications in the background pending. And I don't think there's any of the residents I have spoken to or who have come to me have any objection to the application that's in front of us today. What they are very confused and concerned about is the fact that it's all been, as Councillor Barnacle has alluded to, it's all been mixed in together in the noise impact assessment. And the regulatory services manager recommends that as part of the environmental consultation response, the number of events should be restricted to a cumulative total, and that's between any venues that are in the environment, of 30 events per year between Ochterhouse and the stables. If we approve today that there are there are 30 events allowed in Ochterarder House, does that mean that if Ochterarder House has 30 events, the stables, if it comes to pass, will not be allowed any events?
No, again, this application is being looked at on its own merits, and the cumulative number of events that's proposed as a result of this application is 30. Any subsequent application that we will be looking at will look at the issue and determine how control would be put in place relative to that proposal at the stables, for example. And what could take place there is that the condition could set out that no more than 30 events in conjunction with Ochterarder House took place. But at this point in time, the cumulative number would be 30, and that relates to Ochterarder House on its own, because there is no planning permission in place for the stables. But that could be dealt with under separate cover by that separate application, and that would be fed into by environmental health if further information was required.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mr. Smith, but I think the confusion is without doubt tangible that because the noise impact assessment has included an assessment of the noise impact from the stables when it probably shouldn't have, then everybody's very confused about what everything means, and there's no clarity in this application. And as I say, I don't think any of the residents are in any way objecting to Ochterarder House being reinstated in its previous role. It's just the confusion that exists surrounding the rest of the noise impact assessment.
Well, maybe to carry on there, Councillor, there is no proposal before you today suggesting that anything will be undertaken at the stables. So all you need to concern yourself with at this point in time is Ochterarder House. The stables will be dealt with separately.
I appreciate that, but as I say, because the noise impact assessment has muddied the waters and they're both in together, it's very difficult to separate it out.
Yeah, and what we've done in the report is set out that Ochterarder House can operate for 30 days in a year, taking account of the noise assessment that covers both venues. If the applicant wishes to review that and look at Ochterarder House as a standalone venue, they would need to undertake a separate noise assessment. But they chose to undertake a conjoined noise assessment, so Ochterarder House has been limited in line with what could happen if there was a recommendation and a subsequent decision to approve any activity at the stables.
Well, my question then is why, if we're only dealing with Ochterarder House, are we not only dealing with Ochterarder House noise impact assessment?
Because the applicants chose to undertake a conjoined noise assessment, we have felt that that gives us sufficient comfort to move forward on the basis of the recommendation that we're putting forward today to approve the use of Ochterarder House for 30 days, taking account of the comment within the noise assessment that looks at noise that could occur as a result of both the stables and Ochterarder House.
But I would suggest that you're completely muddying the water. You're putting in a noise impact assessment on something which is not relevant to today's application.
Councillor Reid, we are actually in questions, not comments at the moment.
Sorry.
I'd maybe pass to my environmental health colleagues to maybe give some further comment on how the noise assessment has been undertaken and the issues that you're raising.
Lynn, I think you want to answer them.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, if we had asked for a noise impact assessment for the standalone Ochterarder House, and then if the other application came in, we would ask for a cumulative effect for Auchterarder House and the stables. But the applicant has done that in this noise impact assessment, and he has assessed the amplified music noise from the Auchterarder House and from the stables, and he has given that a cumulative effect. So what we are saying is a standalone, looking at this one, excuse me, this development on its own, we are saying that 30 days of events would be sufficient. If the stable application comes in, then, as Christian Smith rightly said, then we could put on, because of we know what the cumulative effect is from the music, we would put on that it would be 30 days events in conjunction with Auchterarder House events. So it would still be 30 days events for both venues. I hope that explains it.
Yeah, that explains it. So just to be clear, if Auchterarder House has 30 events and if the stables is up and running, Auchterarder has 30 events, the stables will not be allowed to have an event that year. No,
it would be allowed to have an event, but it would have to be in conjunction with the 30 days for Auchterarder House. So if there was an event in Auchterarder House, that would be one day. And then if there was an event on the same day in the stables, that would be classed as conjunctively as two events. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. So the maximum is 30 events, and or 30 days, as Mr. Smith has said. A Saturday is a day, a Sunday is a day. So that's 2 days.
So
events.
If we're just looking at Auchterarder House itself, it can have 30 days of events for approval on that development alone. And then looking at the combined, if the stables then comes in online, then you would look at the combined, and the 30 days would include for both venues, for the stables and Auchterarder House. But as Christian says, we don't have the application in front of us for the stables. We're only looking at Auchterarder House, and as a standalone, it will be able to have 30 days events.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor James, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Vice Convener. Just trying to get back to what we have in front of us. Am I right in thinking this was originally a hotel which changed to residential, and basically we're putting it back to what it was, or being requested? And I know there's a certain amount of concern regarding the noise and what have you, but surely if these are events, they'd also be subject to licensing, and wouldn't licensing condition for noise also? Thank you.
Mr. Smith, I think.
I just wanted to clarify that what the proposal we have before us today for Councillor James is to use the dwelling house on up to 30 days in any 1 year as an events venue. But for the other 335 days, it would remain as a house. So the principal use of the property will remain as a house. I accept, that there is some confusion over the way in which they have decided to present the noise assessment, and it may well be that it would have been better for them in terms of the number of days that they could use the property if they had done individual noise assessment for this proposal and a cumulative one in relation to the stables. So in effect, they have reduced or potentially reduced the amount of activity that can take place at Auchterarder House by doing that conjoined noise assessment, and we are therefore required to constrain through the conditions activities as if it was being undertaken at most venues, because we don't have the individual detail related to Auchterarder House. So I don't know if that gives any clarity, but it's not reverting back to a hotel.
No,
It's
you've
an
made that
events venue for 30 days.
That's crystal clear now, Christian. Thank you very much. I just thought it could have been, the noise issue could have been dealt with by licensing. I totally get where you're coming from. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other questions coming through at the moment. We'll just give it a last few seconds. Okay, then we'll move to the debate. And would anybody like to put a motion through? Councillor James.
Yep, thanks, Vice Convener. Yes, I know that the people are going to have an issue, but we're looking at, like Christian has told us several times, the one property in front of us for 30 days. It was formerly a hotel. I don't think there's an issue because if the stables, which people seem to be going down the rabbit hole with, comes to us, we'll look at that again anyway. So with this here, I'm more than happy to go with what the officers are recommending in this paper. I'm happy to put forward. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor James. Councillor Hearn, I think you want to second the motion.
Yeah, I'm happy to second it. I've got no issues.
Fine, thank you very much. I'll wait to see if any amendments come through, but that doesn't look like there's going to be any. Nope. So I'll open up for anybody who wants to have any comments. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you very much, Convener. I realise it is not the job of this committee to offer any applicants planning advice, but I think it's been demonstrated today quite clearly how unfortunate it is that this has arrived to us in a piecemeal fashion, and it would certainly be much better in future if we either got the whole idea in one go, or if we very clearly separated items when they come, because I am concerned that this stores up confusion for the future rather than making things as clear as they should be. So I think it's unfortunate that the confusion has arisen, and it's much better for stuff to arrive to us as a complete package or as a very defined individual package to enable us to determine this with a bit more ease than we have this morning.
Thank you, Councillor. Comments noted. In the absence of any other comments, I can say that the paper has now been approved, and we will move on to the next item. And the next item this morning is 422. That is the change of use and alterations to agricultural buildings to form an estate office and farm shop with butchery and game store, formation of parking area, access roads and associated works. This is at Kindram Park Farm, Harriet Field, Logie Almond. And Mrs. Condiff is going to introduce the report.
Thank you, Vice Convener. The proposal, as you've said, involves a change of use and alterations to two existing barns at Kindram Park Farm in Harriet Field. The intention is to use one as an estate office and the other primarily as a butchery unit. It's also proposed to form a parking area with a new access road and also associated works. This aerial shot shows the settlement of Harriet Field with the access road to Kindram Park Farm running in a northerly direction very much in a straight line before branching to the left westwards to the existing buildings of Kindram Park Farm. The route passes Kindram House, the only property not in the control of the applicant on the route from Harriet Field to the proposed development site. And the B8063 public road is located immediately to the south of Harriet Field. There we go. This plan, it's not particularly clear, it's quite small, but as members will be aware, having read the report, that one of the main concerns of the objectors to the proposed development is the traffic and access through the small settlement of Harriet Field. As you can see from this plan, there are existing informal passing places on the route, and the proposal is to supplement those passing places with 3 new or improved passing places located on the main street to ensure there is no great distance between passing places. Additionally, some proposed verge widening is proposed within Harriet Field and also some new directional signage. This shows the site layout plan when we're zoomed into on the site for the proposed development area. You can clearly see the existing agricultural buildings and the farmhouse of Cundrum Park Farm. The two barns subject to the development, which are currently open-sided barns, East Barn and West Barn, are located to the south of the existing group of farm buildings. And the proposal is to form an estate office in the West Barn, which will also include a reception area for the activities of the estate, including tourist accommodation. And in the East Barn, the proposal is to form a butchery unit, including a farm shop and game store. It's also proposed to form a parking area with new access road and associated works, including new hedging, which will assist in integrating the changes into the landscape. This first photo is taken from Harriet Field, looking northwards to the Cundrum Park Farm buildings, which you can see in the distance towards the top of the screen. This is the long straight that you saw both in the aerial shot previously and the passing places plan. And on this stretch, new passing places will be formed and also improvements to the junction. This second photo shows the existing two barns, the two open-sided barns, which look very dark. It's just because you're looking into the barn. And the proposal will be to convert those buildings by infilling the frontages and creating more attractive permanent buildings. A contemporary solution is proposed utilising glazing and render, as well as retaining the grey profile sheeting, thus maintaining the agricultural feel to the buildings. This final slide shows an impression of the proposed new buildings, with the office to the west, left of the screen, and the new butchery unit and farm shop to the east, the right of the screen. The finishing materials for the buildings are a combination of the grey profile sheeting and white render. That concludes the stills, and we're now back to the site plan. Thank you, Vice Convener.
Thank you, Mrs. Conliffe. Now we have our first deputation this morning, and I'm hoping Mr. Farningham is on the telephone. Mr. Farningham, are you there?
Good morning, Alan Farningham here.
Good morning, Mr. Farningham. Now we're ready for your deputation. As normal, you'll have 5 minutes to make your deputation to the committee. My colleague, Mr. Williams, will be timing you, and he will give you a nod at the 4-minute mark so that you can wind up within the 5-minute term. So if you'd like to begin now, that'll be fine.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alan Farningham. I'm a planning consultant, and I act on behalf of Logie Ammond Estate, the applicant. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for allowing me to speak to the committee this morning. The description of the proposed development and the planning policy context has been very well covered in the presentation by the planning officer, particularly in her report, and therefore does not need any repeating by me. However, by way of some contextual background to the proposals, I would like to bring the following to the attention of members. First of all, the applicants bought the estate in early 2019. It was in a very rundown condition, and as a consequence, since its purchase, the applicants have invested heavily to the tune of £2.5 to £3 million. In addition to promoting significant new forestry planting and management schemes and improving the estate's gaming facilities, it has sought and achieved planning permission for 16 tourist lets, bringing back into active use a number of the estate's redundant buildings. And you'll see from this current proposal that this proposal also seeks to use existing redundant buildings as part of the scheme. The quality and design and finishes have been of the highest quality, and wherever possible, the emphasis has been on employing locally, particularly construction firms from the likes of Dunkeld and also Crieff. The farm at Cundrum Park was brought back into active use in December 2019, having lain dormant for a number of years. The proposals are an integral and significant part of both the farm's and the estate's ongoing restoration. The butcher and farm shop will sell estate produce only in terms of venison, game, lamb, of which the estate has 1,500 head of lamb, and also beef. And they are currently about to import 55 head of Highland cows. It will be available to tourists when the holiday lets are used and for sale to local residents. So the produce from the shop is simply for the use of the tourists who are coming to utilise the holiday lets, and for sale to some local restaurants which the applicants have been speaking to see if there's interest, and there has been. There will be no cooking on the premises. The office is needed as an estate manager, is currently working out of temporary accommodation. There's also a need to provide a registration meet and greet point for the tourist lets, and the new office will accommodate all of this. The proposals will help create 2 to 3 jobs. Again, the intention would be to seek local employment. And indeed, there's recently been 2 extra gamekeepers appointed, just in fact this week. The applicants are fully aware of the damage to road verges within Harriet Field, which have been caused by their farm vehicles.
Mr. Flanagan, 1 minute left.
And have agreed improvements to rectify these damages, including road widening, and generally improve access to the farm and the proposed buildings. So therefore, to conclude, and just on that last point, I understand that these aspects are covered by condition, which the applicant has no issue with. So therefore, to conclude, I would commend the proposals to you and respectfully ask that you endorse the planning officer's recommendation of approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farningham. Now, there may be some questions from the committee for you, so if you could just hold on the line for me for a moment. I've got question markers here for Councillor Wilson and Councillor Simpson, but were they for officers or for the deputation?
Mine's for the deputation and officers.
Right, okay, Councillor. And the same with you, Councillor Simpson?
Mine is the same, dependent on the answers.
Right, okay, so we'll start with you, Councillor Wilson, your question for Mr. Farningham.
Thank you, and thanks for your presentation, Mr. Farningham. I'm just going to start off. Questions are all surrounding roads and access and vehicles and traffic. On para 49 of the report, on page 62 of our papers, it says the applicant has demonstrated there's likely to be on average around 15 arrival and departures associated with the changeover of lodges, and an additional 15 arrival and departures associated with the farm shop. Now, you said in your presentation just now that the shop was mainly for people who were staying in the lodges and local people, but if I were to get my wife to drive me from Perth to you to buy some venison, what's to prevent other folk just rolling up? And your 15 plus 15 seems light to me. Would you like to comment a bit more about that? And have you consulted with the folks in Harrietfield, particularly? I can understand the laybys on your own road that you're controlling, and that's fairly easy to achieve. But in Harrietfield, which is fairly tight road geometry, have you consulted with the residents there to agree what mitigation measures you're going to put in place?
Okay, first of all, there's a number of questions in there, Councillor Wilson. First of all, in terms of the numbers were arrived at purely based on an average. I think you'll recall in my presentation that there are 16 holiday lets currently within the estate, and the emphasis of the the farm shop and butcher is very much for people arriving to utilise the tourist lets to buy the produce there, to actually buy the produce at the shop and then take it to their accommodation and utilise it. As far as any other sales off-site are concerned, the applicants have spoken to a number of local restaurants, and that would be very much restricted to the delivery of produce to these particular outlets. Now, it's also fair to say, and it's a very good point that you make, is that there is nothing as part of these proposals that would prevent someone coming from Perth or coming from Dunkeld or Crieff or further afield to utilise the shop. There is nothing, but the emphasis of this facility is very much aimed at the tourist lets that will be facilitating the on-site accommodation and also to a small number of local restaurants. That's the first answer to your initial question. Secondly, in terms of improvements to the farm access road and the wider road network, including the public road, which starts from the farm access road down into Harrietfield, there has not been any consultation with local residents, but there has been significant consultation with the applicant's transport consultant and the roads department. And as part of that, the improvements that are being presented as part of these proposals in terms of passing places on the farm access road, but more importantly, improvements by way of road widening to the section of road from the farm access road where it meets the adopted road down into Harrietfield, then meeting onto the main road through Harrietfield, has been agreed with the roads officer, and I understand that that forms part of a series of conditions attached to these proposals if the proposals were granted approval. And in terms of the content of those conditions, the applicant would certainly have no issue with their content and indeed implementing them. And in terms of the improvements to the road, they are fully aware of their responsibility on the basis that the damage that's been done to the road verges, particularly in relation to that which is the public road or the section of public road from the farm access down to the main road past a number of properties, has been caused by their farm vehicles. And in doing that, they're happy, more than happy, to improve and rectify that damage and indeed look to avoid further damage in the future by widening the roads, and that at that location. And this has all been agreed in advance in consultation with the council's road officer.
Thank you, Convener. Can I ask a quick supplementary?
You may, yes.
Thanks for a comprehensive answer. I suppose behind my question in relation to access was, are you going to become a Globeburn? And that is a compliment, by the way, to another farm shop not terribly far away, but Globeburn has expanded exponentially over the years, been extremely successful, and is a venue for folk to go to. You're not proposing cafes or anything like that at this stage, but I just wonder how you're going to manage control of increasing amount of traffic if your farm shop's successful, and would you like to comment on that?
Well, the intention is not to go for the scale of development that you've referred to. The intention is very much focused in on tourists coming to utilise the accommodation on the estate and utilising the produce that's prepared or is secured and sourced on the estate to local restaurants, or indeed even to local residents in Harrietfield. There is no intention of looking to make this a bigger operation, and indeed, certainly from the applicant's point of view, given the location of these facilities, they don't consider that it's on a main tourist route, and so therefore it doesn't have the same sort of what I would call tourist curb appeal that bigger operations may have.
Thank you, Convener. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Farningham.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson, do you have a question for the...
Yes, thank you, Convener. Although I can assure you Councillor Wilson and I are not only in separate rooms but in separate houses, he's asked broadly similar questions to myself. I just have, if I might just ask Mr. Farningham for a little bit of clarification, again from the same paragraph 49 on 62. It says there it's to help us understand the associated trips, but it fails for me because it doesn't give a time scale. So it's saying 15 arrivals and departures, and to do with the lodges, and the similar number to do with the shop, but it doesn't say whether that would be predicted to be daily or weekly or whatever. And I wonder if Mr. Farningham can give us some clarity on that, or if not, officers.
If I may respond before officers, if that's acceptable. In terms of the 15 trips, that's taking my understanding is that takes a worst case scenario on a daily basis where virtually all of the tourist lets would be arriving on the same day. And that is a possibility at certain times during summer, although these tourist lets and indeed this shop will be open for all 12 months of the year. So the likelihood is that the numbers would vary on a daily basis, but my understanding is that number is focused on a daily rate, not a weekly rate or a monthly rate. So it's looking at presenting the best possible worst case scenario in relation to the anticipation of what the applicants are intending in terms of the number of people that they anticipate coming to utilise this facility, which again, just emphasising that it is very much focused on the tourists coming to facilitate the accommodation on the estate and one or two deliveries to local residents, which wouldn't necessarily be, it could be on a daily basis. Again, it depends on the number of times that they would be using the facility, but it certainly wouldn't be more than 1 or 2 times per day. Hello.
I think I'm quite content with that, and I would like to thank Mr. Farningham for both his deputation and his fulsome answers. Thank you.
Okay. I think Councillor James, you have a question for Mr. Farningham?
Yes, thanks again, Convener. Mr. Farningham, thanks for your deputation. Absolutely brilliant. Mine's a fairly simple question. This is in my ward. I'm quite familiar with this area. Harrietfield is a very small, quiet village, and you're talking about upgrading roads. And I understand the road from the village down into the farm, you're looking at passing places, but I'm thinking particularly I'm looking at the map on page 71 of our papers, and the road coming off the B road, which goes around forms like a circular, if you like, around the village. You say there's plans to do something to the east, the eastern access there. Can I ask, the land that comes off that circular road from behind the houses, is that in the ownership of your clients? And have you looked at the feasibility of realigning the road from the western entrance at all, please?
Right. My understanding is that land is within the control of the applicant. Other options have been looked at, but in terms of actually even looking at an alternative access completely coming through the estate, but the feasibilities that were done on that were just simply proved economically unviable. So that in terms of the improvements that have been discussed and agreed with the council's road officer is, as far as the applicants are concerned and the applicants' consultants, the best that can possibly be achieved. As part of the overall road improvements, there is no intention to improve the link, what I call the western link as opposed to the eastern link, on the basis that my understanding, and I know Harrietfield very well because I live over the hill at Trockery up the Bran, and I frequently go through Harrietfield on my bike. So I'm very familiar with the area in terms of traffic use, and in terms of that western link, my understanding is that it's virtually impossible for an agricultural vehicle to utilise that access, so that all agricultural vehicles come from the east, and that's where the emphasis of the improvements and the widening are on, because I understand that there isn't a similar problem on the western link to the eastern link. But the applicants have looked at other alternatives, but none of them have really proved economically viable, even although in terms of what they're doing here, there will be a cost associated with the improvements, but it's a cost that can be absorbed. Whereas if you're looking at other alternatives, you're looking at substantial new tracks of new road.
Thank you very much for that. That's comprehensive. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions coming through, Mr. Farningham, so thank you very much for your presentation and coming to the committee today. Oh, hold on, there's one more coming through. Hold on for me. Councillor Ahern.
Thanks very much, and thank you, Mr. Farningham, for your presentation. I'm still trying to get my head around the questions that have been given to you by the colleagues with regards to the number of vehicles. We're talking about the vehicles, we're talking about normal farm traffic that's going to use that road and go through the houses there in Harrietfield, but we're also talking about these departures for the lodge, the estimated, which I think is pretty much underestimated, the arrival and departures for the farm shop. I'm assuming if he's operating a shop, it's not just going to be for the meat products that are produced on the farm, but also any associated vegetables or anything else that's grown on that farm, but it's also going to be associated products that may need to be purchased to go along with those, especially if it's going to be supplying or potentially supplying the lets. So you're going to have some commercial vehicles going down there as well. I understand that he's going to upgrade the access road that's on his land there. My concern is the residents and the small eastern or western access through Harrietfield itself, and the potential disruption to or additional disruption to the residents there. I have an issue with your estimate of the 15 or so people that are going to be accessing the farm.
Well, that was a figure that was arrived at in terms of considering what the likely average was going to be. I'm looking at paragraph 49 of the officer's report, and that's talking about an average of 15 arrivals and departures on a daily basis, as opposed to being the absolute maximum. So there will be days when that figure is less, and there will be days when that figure will be greater. But given the limited limited produce that this farm shop will sell, for example, in terms of the estate doesn't actually produce any vegetables or any crop. It's very much a gaming estate and livestock estate. So therefore, in terms of the products that will be sold at the shop, they will be predominantly, I think, as I said in my presentation, venison, game, lamb, and beef. In terms of accompaniments to that, if you're thinking about barbecues or how it's going to be cooked, that would all be facilitated within the actual tourist accommodation itself, and people would be expected to bring their own products with them. Although it's fair to say that it's likely that there could be additional products over and above the actual meat products and game products to facilitate the cooking of these, but that would be extremely limited. And going back to the damage that's been done on the existing eastern link between the private access road and the main road going through Harrietfield, that would continue regardless of whether these proposals went ahead or not, on the basis that my understanding is that that's being caused by large farm vehicles and not by HGVs. And indeed, actually, in terms of HGVs, there would be no requirement for HGVs to be facilitating either the farm shop or the butchers. It would be at most very small commercial vans.
Yeah, I mean, I think you misunderstood it when I was saying accompaniments to the meat and the veg. I mean, the residents of the lodges aren't just going to have meat on the plate; they're going to have other food requirements as well, plus other meals that aren't necessarily meat based. So, in order to keep those guests, you're going to need deliveries of food, which will either come, as you said, in vans or potentially in small HGVs, depending on what's ordered. And I just think there's, as well as these 15 vehicles to the lodge, the potential of 15 or more or less to the farm shop, plus the commercial vehicles, plus the farm traffic, that's a fairly substantial increase in the traffic that's going through that area.
There's no doubt that there will be an increase in traffic. As far as the transport consultant acts on behalf of the applicants is concerned, and indeed, you know, these figures were agreed with the roads officer, and the roads officer can clearly speak on that to members. But it was based on an average number, and in terms of additional products, yes, I think it's fair to say that there would be additional products, but this is not going to be a large scale shop that's going to be open and attracting people from all over to this facility. This shop is very much focused in on a local clientele, which is primarily that associated with the tourist lets, and to a lesser extent on small local restaurants within within the local area. It's not intending, and indeed, in terms of the business plan that's been thought about this, is that it's not being seen as something that's going to be attracting people from far and wide. That's not the intention.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. It's one of those things perhaps to clarify with officers when we get to questioning them. Councillor Barnacle.
Thanks, Convener. I think in the earlier slides, if I recall, there were 3 passing places suggested. I seem to recall that. I don't know whether that's correct, but I'm just wondering if Mr. Farningham thinks that's enough passing places, or whether there was consideration of whether there might be a couple more. I just wondered about that. I appreciate that dealing with the roads issues around Harriet Village would be prohibitively expensive probably, and possibly that could be also a council issue as well. But just on the passing places, do you regard 3 as adequate given the previous questioning from colleagues?
Well, on the basis of the advice that I have received and the applicants have received from the project's transport consultant, it's considered that these are more than sufficient to meet the increased traffic movements that would prevail if these proposals were to be approved and were to go ahead. I can only, basically, as a planning consultant, I can only really go on the advice that I'm given by the project's traffic consultant, very much in the way I think that the council's planning officer would have to take on board the advice and recommendations of the council's roads officer. So I can only go on the basis of the advice that I've been provided now. I've been told, and indeed it's been articulated in documents to the council, that these number of passing places will be more than sufficient. And indeed, it would be interesting to hear what the council's roads officer would have to say about that, on the basis that he has agreed with the approach that's been taken.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Farningham. There doesn't seem to be any more questions coming through now, finally. So thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you for coming to the committee today. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Right, members, we'll now open this up to questions to officers. Now, I know, Councillor Wilson, you had a question for officers.
Thank you. Yes, it's to go back to the roads issues, and based on Mr. Farningham's response to that, obviously the roads officers have been involved in the consultations. Did they any time consider consulting local folk who lived in Harrietfield? Is my first question. And secondly, are they content that the estimate that we've heard, I'm not going to go over all the figures again, but the estimate we have from the applicant, the number of vehicles, is realistic in view of the comments that have been made earlier?
Well, our colleagues in roads maintenance have been involved heavily in this process. They're happy with the improvements that have been made, including the road widening and indeed the passing places which have been put in place. We feel that with the level of frequency that is in this proposal, that everything considered, that these measures are sufficient. That the level of frequency seems reasonable. As Mr. Farningham said, that's an average figure. But we feel with these measures to the roads, on the public roads and indeed the private access, are acceptable to accommodate this additional traffic. In terms of consultation, I would doubt that our roads maintenance colleagues have consulted the locals, but I would have to check on that, I'm afraid.
Mrs. Connolly, do you want to come in?
Yes, if I could, Vice Convener, thank you. Yeah, just to emphasise what has been said by Mr. Lee from our road side of things, is that we're content that the level that is proposed as part of this is not hugely significant compared to the existing traffic that is already there. This is clearly a farm business and it hasn't been operated quite as much as it was in the past. So at the moment, without any improvements at all, you've got a lot of agricultural traffic and farm traffic potentially utilising this access up. What we are looking at are the two barn buildings that exist at the moment but being converted to a new use. Now, what we're looking at in terms of the number of trips that was discussed previously is that you've got 30 in total. It was 15 potentially for the estate office and 15 potentially for the farm shop area, including the butchery unit. And I think it's reasonable and perhaps been overestimated rather than underestimated, as was previously suggested, as a result of the number of units that they already have for holiday accommodation. It's primarily going to be the changeover day. So one day a week on most occasions, because there'll often be weekly lets, you would get that kind of number of trips coming. But it's been averaged out over the whole week. And that's why we get this intention of about approximately 30, which is 15 in and 15 out. So I think for the proposal that we've got and the level of usage that is proposed, it is reasonable what has been asked for by our roads colleagues with regard to improving the access into the site.
Thank you.
Thank
Councillor
you.
Wilson, anything else? No?
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Simpson, you had a question, I think, for officers.
No, my question's been covered, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gray, then, your question.
Thank you, Convener. Perhaps Anne Condlove again. Is the public roads fit for purpose, almost irrespective of the number of vehicles going up and down to that farm? I realise there might not be more sufficient laybys as passing places on the private road, but that's something which could be dealt with at a later date should numbers exceed the estimated numbers. I simply want to know, are the public roads fit for purpose, almost irrespective of numbers of vehicles going up and down to the farm?
It's perhaps more a question for my colleagues of roads, but as far as I'm concerned in terms of planning, you've got the existing public roads and they aren't great in and around the Harrietfield area, not just up and into Harrietfield. There's a lot of narrow roads with limited passing facilities. Now coming up and into what is the village of Harrietfield, clearly the agricultural vehicles that have used it in the past and more recently have caused problems, which we've seen photos of from a number of objectors. But this will actually improve the situation because they are agreeing to the widening of the road in Harrietfield itself before you get to the track that leads up to the farm and the passing places. So in a sort of initial response to your question is that, are the existing roads sufficient? They could be better, certainly, but we do have an existing agricultural farm there and there are a number of vehicles utilising that facility at the moment.
Yeah, I perhaps should have said the public roads as they are intended to be improved, being fit for the purpose I was suggesting. That was the point. And thanks for that.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I don't really have anything to add to Anne there. That's exactly the situation.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any further questions coming through. I'll give it a few more seconds just in case there's a late one. Nope. So we'll now move to the debate stage. Would there be anyone who would like to put a motion forward, please? Councillor Gray.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Again, there's a fairly straightforward application, frankly. I see no reason not to approve it. It's a rural activity. It will bring people to rural Perthshire, no bad thing. Tourism doesn't just affect this little farm. It will affect, or the estate, I should say, it will affect all sorts of other businesses throughout the area, and that's indeed the sort of thing that we need to encourage. There's no reason at all I can see to reject this for transport reasons or otherwise, and therefore happy to move.
Thank you very much. Councillor James?
Yeah, actually get to do it this time, Convener. second Councillor Gray. I'm like I said, it is in my ward, and I'm more than happy to see business flourish. It's reassuring to know that roads will be improved, and I hope the residents of Harrietfield aren't given too much grief, but quite happy to second Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Councillor James. Is there anyone wishing to put forward an amendment? No. Okay. I'll open up for comments if there are any. Okay, thank you very much. Then the paper's approved. Thank you, members. We're going to start to move on to 4.2.3. Now, I notice the time is 11:30, so I will ask, does anybody want to have a recess? Otherwise, we'll go on. Fine. Okay, we move on to 4.2.3, and I believe Mr. Scott is going to introduce the report.
Thank you, convener. Again, I'll take you through some committee through some stills, providing an overview of the proposal and also some photographs of the site and its surrounding area. This still confirms the extent of the application site, marked in red. It's at a location of a small grouping of residential properties at Pitnacree, which is a hamlet which is located between Logie Rate, which is 4.5 kilometres to the east, and Strathty, which is a settlement 650 metres or thereabouts to the west. The site and the existing houses in the group are accessed from the A827 via the Strathty Road. That's the minor road C447, which is to the south, which is the bottom of the red line site. Thereafter, access is taken northwards along a private driveway, which ultimately goes towards Pitcree House, and that house itself is actually visible in the upper right-hand side of the shot. Moving on now to the site plans. This is the existing site plan, again with the site boundary marked in red, and it shows the majority of the development that would take place. 3 estate steading buildings are located on the site, last used for agriculture or storage purposes. The 2 centrally located buildings are proposed to be altered and extended to form a conversion to make a dwelling house, and similarly the steading to the southeast corner would be used as an ancillary accommodation building. The steadings themselves are of a traditional stone, timber and metal construction, which will be highlighted in photographs later. I'll now take you to the proposed site plan. The left-hand side of the still is the proposed site plan. So a new vehicular access is proposed off the Pitnacree House access, which I referred to earlier, at the northwest of the site. This would lead into a driveway and car parking area for the proposed dwelling. A cartilage area is also proposed to be formed and defined with hedge planting on the north and eastern boundaries. This in turn creates a garden to the eastern part of the site. The 2 larger central steading buildings would form a 3-bed dwelling house, and the 2 buildings would be adapted and joined with a new link, providing the main living accommodation and 2 bedrooms on the ground floor. The western portion of the steading would be increased in height by circa 0.9 of a metre to provide a further bedroom on the upper floor. The steading to the southeast, as advised, would be an ancillary accommodation providing an annex and home office, and that would be accessed through the garden of the proposed dwelling. This plan also illustrates the proximity to and relationship with the existing neighbouring residential properties. Immediately to the south of the steadings are East and West Mill cottages, which were converted to residential use in the early 2000s. South Cottage is located to the southeast of the proposed annex, and further properties within the wider group are located to the south towards the public road. I'll now take you through some photographs of the site. This first photograph shows the existing access at the northwest corner of the site off the track to Pitnacree House. The proposed new vehicular access reference would be to the north at the point roughly where you see the tree stump that's visible to the left. Taking you now to the site and the approach from the western end of the steading, which would be used to form the dwelling house from the steading buildings visible to the left. This still also shows the location of and relationship again with the existing East and West Mill cottages, which are just visible to the right of the shot. The building in the far centre of shot is the standalone steading referenced earlier, where the ancillary accommodation is proposed. I'll take you now through further photos to show these buildings and the site in more detail. This is now the southern approach to the steading, with 2 main buildings visible in the centre and left of the shot, with the existing taller building to the left, that's the west of the site, and the further steading proposed for ancillary accommodation to the right. East Mill Cottage is now visible again on the left of shot, which is separated from the proposed dwelling by the internal access track. Closer now to the main steadings, this is a close-up of the southern elevation. The distinct parts of the building are visible. As advised, living and bedroom accommodation would be provided across the ground floor. Moving on again, this is a closer view still of the westmost part of the building. This is the steading to the west. So it's the tallest part that's being adapted for the proposed dwelling house to provide a further bedroom on the first floor. To the right, the gap between the 2 main steading buildings would be infilled to create the dwelling house. Looking now in an eastward direction, this is a closer view of the steading that's proposed for the ancillary accommodation. Again, it's separated by the access track from East Mill Cottage, which is just visible to the right. South Cottage, which I mentioned earlier, is just visible to the right-hand side of the steading and beyond the boundary wall. Moving now to the north of the site. This photograph was taken just off the Pitnacree House access track, adjacent to the proposed vehicular access, which would be to the right and just out of shot. The proposed garden is visible to the fore of the shot, marked with post and wire fences. The level as land would be tiered down to the proposed dwelling, and as advised earlier, the boundary would be supplemented with native hedging to provide a new curtilage. The steading buildings used to form the new dwelling house are located in the middle of the shot. This elevation would provide the majority of the proposed windows. The proposed annex building is again to the left. The neighbouring properties of East and West Mill cottages are just visible beyond the central steadings, and again South Cottage is just visible beyond to the left of the group. This still illustrates a 3D render of the proposed dwelling house shown from the west gable elevation and the south elevation, which is the main one which fronts onto the track. In response to the proximity of East and West Mill cottages, the design proposes no windows on the southern elevation, with roof lights instead being proposed to protect amenity. This solution is repeated in the proposed annex building shown to the right of this shot. The proposed finishing materials for the dwelling are rubble stone and timber cladding for the walls and a metal clad roof to resemble and replicate the form and appearance of the steading buildings as they exist. We're now back at the proposed site plan, and that concludes the stills for this presentation, Convener.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Now we have the first of two deputations on this application. The first is for Mr. Dimmock. I hope he's on the line.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Dimmock. You are speaking on behalf of the objectors, I believe.
I'm speaking on behalf of the objectors, Hames Nesbitt Limited, who own East Mill Cottage.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. Now you'll have 5 minutes to put your deputation forward. My colleague, Mr. Williams, will time you, and he will give you a warning when you have 1 minute left to go. So over to you.
Thank you, Convener. The concerns of Hames Nesbitt have been set out in written objection. Those concerns have not been adequately addressed by the committee report. In particular, the application is presented as a Category 5 conversion proposal. That category allows residential reuse if an alternative employment use cannot be found. For more than 20 years, the main building was let and used commercially by a local roofer without detriment to near neighbours. Ahead of application submission, the tenant was given notice to quit, so long-standing employment use was ended. That information is not set out in the application. Instead, it's simply presented to you as a vacant building which is no longer useful to the estate. The object of Policy 19 cannot be to encourage residential conversion of traditional buildings by ending employment use. To permit a housing reuse, the guidance requires in all cases evidence of marketing of the building for employment use or for sale or rent for a period of at least a year. No evidence is presented here. The application indicates the main building is not structurally sound. It's in your committee report at para 34. At the same time, it seeks permission for a new house through conversion. More than 60% of the fabric of the main building is to be removed and replaced, leaving little left to convert. Realistically, this is a proposal to reconstruct the main building, and a more accurate description might read reconstruction of steading building to form dwelling, conversion of outbuilding to ancillary accommodation, and change of use of agricultural land to garden ground. My client is a structural engineer who knows the main building and has seen the proposed plans. His professional view is that it's unrealistic to expect the limited fabric to survive at all once main walls and roof are removed and openings formed. Replacement through construction can find support in policy where evidence shows that it's not cost effective to remedy structural defects, and no such evidence is presented here. In terms of biodiversity, policy seeks to protect and enhance all wildlife and wildlife habitats, and this proposal is more than simply a building conversion. It includes development of a greenfield site. The application is supported by a bat report only, and other protected species which could be affected at construction stage, such as barn owl, slow worms and hedgehogs, have not been assessed. A records check reveals that those species have been found within the area of Pitnacree, but their likely presence at the application has not been considered. The requirements of Policy 41 are not met. The site is within 30 metres of a watercourse within the Tay catchment area. Planning policy requires an otter survey to be undertaken. No otter survey is presented. The requirements of Policy 47 are not met. Local residents know that impermeable ground conditions at Pitnacree do not provide effective percolation. Uncertainty over how SUDS could control surface water runoff and ground soakaway discharge from the septic tank are a concern to residents below the site, and insufficient information has been presented to demonstrate that effective disposal within the site to meet the requirements of Policy 53 can be achieved. In terms of the impact on neighbours, dark night skies are a feature of this part of the Strath Tay local landscape area and are valued by Pitnacree residents. The area is sparsely populated and characterised by traditional housing with small windows. In contrast, the application proposes 17 large roof lights and extensive full width and full height gable glazing. Light spill would not be minor and would be quite different to that from other housing within the group. The requirements of Policy 39 to conserve landscape quality and the appearance of the night sky would not be met. And finally, Convener, in terms of overlooking, the committee report, paragraph 43, identifies that place-making guidance is now satisfied as windows in south walls facing neighbours are avoided. Committee should note that following completion and occupation as a house, such windows could be added without planning permission. Members, these proposals fail to satisfy your housing in the countryside guidance and conflict with other planning policy objectives, and I would respectfully ask that the application be refused. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dimmock. Hopefully you'll hold on for some questions from the committee. I have a first question from Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Vice Convener, and thanks for your deputation, Mr. Dimmock. Very informative. I just have one minor question. Well, it's not a minor question, it's a significant one in my mind, but it relates to your assertion in terms of the notice to quit that was served on the previous tenant. Can you give me an idea of the timeline on that? How long ago was that? Is that a recent thing, or is it some time ago?
It's very recent, Councillor. My understanding is it was towards the end of last year. And from the photographs that the office has displayed, you'll see some of the scaffolding material stored outside the building.
Okay, no, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Dimmock. I wasn't sure, Mr. Nisbet, who's the objector you're representing, are they residents in the house that's nearby, or do they just own the house?
They own East Mill Cottage. Hames Nisbet are a development company, and Mr. Nisbet is a structural engineer, and he converted East and West Mill Cottage some few years ago and spends a lot of time there, I think mostly weekends.
Okay, so it's a secondary dwelling rather than a principal dwelling.
I'm making a representation on behalf of the East Mill Cottage, the secondary dwelling.
Okay. How far away is East
directly
Mill?
Opposite? Sorry.
How far away in terms of meters is East Mill Cottage from the proposal?
6.5 meters from the nearest building.
6.5. And
yes,
what?
The width of the lane and a small verge.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I don't see any more questions coming through, Mr. Dimmock, so I will thank you very much for your deputation this morning, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Members, we now have a second deputation from Mr. Sheriff, who is an agent on behalf of the applicant. I believe you're Mr. Johnson and Mr. I have deputation with Mr. Johnson, is that correct? Mr. Johnson.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Johnson.
Hello there. Hello.
Hello. You're making a deputation with Mr. Sheriff or just on your own?
There's a little bit of confusion at our end. Mr. Sheriff is the applicant and indeed the owner of Pitnacree Estate. Mr. Sheriff has been called away, but his intention was to make himself available to Planning and Development Committee this morning, should any questions be pertinent for him that I was unable to answer.
All right. Are you going to make a deputation, or are you just here to answer questions?
I'm here primarily to answer any questions that the elected members may have, Vice Convener. I've listened very carefully to Mr. Dimmick and his presentation. Needless to say, we don't agree with the vast majority of his concerns. What I would like to say is we've had, I'm sure the elected members will have read the report, and there's been an extended negotiation and very useful dialogue with the planning department, in particular Planning Officer John Williamson, who has kindly given up quite a bit of his time to offer a useful way forward, which I think we've addressed.
Okay, fine. Well, we'll go to questions then. And I have Councillor Drysdale with a question for you.
Good morning, Mr. Johnson.
Good morning. Good morning.
If you have listened to the previous deputation, you'll have heard my question. And my question is the same to you. Do you agree with the statement made by the previous speaker in relation to the timing and the nature of the notice to quit on the previous tenant?
No, I'm afraid I don't agree with what was said. It's absolutely fair to say that the buildings were used for many years by a local roofing contractor. The scaffold poles and scaffold planks that the elected members saw in the photographic presentation were simply deposited there. The roofing contractor used the site primarily as a somewhere to store his equipment from time to time. Primarily the equipment, not exclusively, but primarily the equipment that he used to erect scaffolding and do various repairs and maintenance on the estate. It was a convenience thing, although my understanding is a business arrangement was agreed with the estate for that. As to when any notices to quit and such like were agreed with the roofing contractor and Mr. Sheriff, I'm afraid I can't comment on that. I don't know the answer to that. But it was, as you can see from the photographs, the buildings are not in great condition. They do need substantial alteration and improvement, no matter what their use. And I think it's quite telling that the equipment was used, was stored outside the buildings primarily, rather than inside the buildings. So the buildings have, in fact, reached the end of their useful life as far as the estate is concerned. Hopefully that answers your question, Councillor Drysdale.
It does, however, if I can just follow up. So therefore, what you're saying is that there, if I understand you correctly, and tell me if I don't understand you correctly, but that there was a commercial lease in place in relation to another business, and notice was given to terminate that.
I can't answer that. I don't know if that notice was given or not. All I can say is my understanding is there was an informal arrangement between a roofing contractor and the estate to permit scaffolding poles and scaffolding planks to be stored in that location for convenience of doing repairs and maintenance on the estate from time to time. It was my understanding was it was you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours type thing.
Okay, thank you.
I think the point, Councillor Dryers, was if the gentleman can't answer, he can't answer it. So that's where we stand. Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, Convener. I wanted to probe a little further on the issue that Councillor Drysdale was raising, so it may well be that you don't have the information, but I'm just going to ask a question anyway. Following on from the roofing contractor, and I don't want to go back into that issue in particular, what efforts have been made to market the property or try and get alternative uses for business or tourism rather than the residential proposal that's on the table? Clearly that was something that was raised by the previous speaker. I just don't know if you've got any further information for us on that.
No, Councillor Purvis, I don't have anything, and no pun intended, nothing concrete in relation to that. I think I do think it's worth stating that the buildings, as you will have seen from the presentation, are not in a useful state at present. So if alternative uses were to be entertained, they would need a substantial intervention. And if there was a useful and viable commercial use for the buildings, then clearly that would have had and would have quite a significant impact on the immediate residents. The estate's feeling is that residential use is less of an impact to the neighbours rather than any form of commercial or tourist-related development.
Okay, thank you for that. And if you're not able to provide additional information, that's fine. I suppose the test that we as councillors are seeking to apply is whether Category 5 of Policy 19 is met or not, and the question of what the impact is looking at residential versus commercial is immaterial in applying that test, I suppose. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Purvis. It may be questions to raise with officers perhaps later on. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I did put a note in the comments. The question was answered by not being answered or able to answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
That was it. That was it. Was it? Okay.
Yes, indeed. It was the same question as Councillor Drysdale. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Okay. Fine. Okay. I'm not seeing any further questions, Mr. Johnston. So I think that's going to be it. Thank you very much for coming along this morning.
Okay.
It's a shame, as I say, Mr. Sheriff could have been here, but thank you anyway for answering what you could.
Yes, I mean he did make best efforts, but he was called away this morning, I'm afraid.
Okay, but thank you for your efforts anyway. Thank you.
Many thanks. Thank you. Bye.
Right, we now open this up to officers, and Councillor Simpson, you have a question.
Thank you very much, Convener. I have a question on page 87, paragraph 3. I'm often concerned about annexes and home offices starting off as that and then becoming something else. Could I have a bit of clarity, on where about the access to this building is? Perhaps we could go back to the photo of it, be helpful.
Yeah, Councillor Simpson, thank you very much for the question. Just whilst we're going through the stills there, I think I touched on in terms of the presentation at this point, just to clarify that the ancillary building, we are recommending a condition ultimately that stays within the same use and ownership as the main dwelling house should permission be granted. So that ensures that it is of an ancillary nature to the proposal. In terms of its access, there is one point of vehicular access to the entire proposal. So vehicular access would be taken from the right of this shot into the driveway and parking area. Access on foot from the house to the ancillary accommodation would be through a courtyard and garden area, so it would be entirely contained within the proposed curtilage of the application before you.
Right, thank you. If I may just ask a supplementary, you've almost answered my next question, Mr. Scott.
Go ahead.
Ancillary accommodation can cause some problems later on. I just wondered, how would it be monitored in future, and what steps could the council take if it was found to be shall we say, let as an Airbnb or used for a separate purpose and later on.
So the condition I referenced earlier, condition 3 is recommended. So that seeks to control essentially the use and occupation of that of the ancillary unit. So it would be self-regulating insofar as the owner is expected to comply with that. If we have any concerns, it would be a matter of enforcement that we would undertake investigation to establish if that happened. Clearly, that's speculative. We do expect that the applicant and occupier would comply with the condition, but because that condition is there, it does give certainty that it would take a period of 10 years for non-compliance with that condition for something to get away from us. So it has shown time and time again that it's an appropriate mechanism to control. In terms of future concerns about occupation for ancillary, again, it's somewhat speculative, but there would actually be a secondary legislative and regulatory process coming forward from next year to control occupation of short-term lets. But just to clarify, that's not what we have here. It is only proposed as an annex in Home Office.
Thank you very much, members. Now, I've just been notified that Mr. Sheriff has actually come back on. Now, hello there. Under normal circumstances, we've passed the time for deputations, but I understand there were several questions which were raised by members which Mr. Johnson couldn't answer. So I'm prepared to go back and allow you to answer those questions as they come through. So I believe Councillor Drysdale, you had a question that you needed clarifying on.
Yes, thank you for that, Deputy Convener, and thank you for attending the committee. It's an assertion was made by an agent on behalf of an objector that a building which was previously the subject of a commercial lease, as I understand it, notice to quit was served on the tenant, and in order to create a vacant property to allow this proposed development to proceed. Can you confirm whether that is the case, when that happened, and also what was the reasoning behind that tactic? Thank you.
Well, the first thing I can confirm is there was no commercial lease in place. We had no contract in place. We had a roofer who we offered space to store his equipment, and it was an offer in kind. In return, over the years, he would check the roofs on the other steading buildings on the estate. And that arrangement came to an end before Christmas, but there was no commercial or no contract arrangement made at all.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up, and I'm glad you returned to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I think Councillor Purvis, you wanted to ask a question for clarification.
Okay, well, I suppose it's linked to that previous question that Councillor Drysdale was asking about the Category 5 of housing in the countryside policy, and whether or not attempts have been made to market the property for commercial or tourism uses, and if not, why has that not happened?
Well, we've always used the buildings for storage. There's never been any attempt to advertise or promote them for commercial or tourist usage. I mean, they've been pretty well, they're not really fit for purpose, to be honest, in terms of they're not particularly well maintained, they're old, so we just use them for storage, and you know, and we sometimes lent it storage to third parties, as mentioned in my previous response.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I think it has, yeah. There were no other questions, Mr. Sheriff, so thank you for coming back and just clarifying those points. That's very kind of you.
No problem. Is there anything else?
There's no other questions coming through, so that's it, I'm afraid. So thank you very much anyway.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye. So I'll now go back to Councillor Purvis again, because you had questions for officers now.
Sorry, Councillor Bowen, I was trying to look something up, but obviously I was not quick enough. So we'll go on the hoof and see how it goes.
Okay.
So I had two questions. I'll ask them separately, if that's okay. The first one is following on from those questions that I have asked of the agent and the applicant about Category 5 of Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside. My understanding was, as it says in the report of handling as well, that you can only use that category to proceed with development should all other uses for business or tourism be considered, or whatever other uses that there are available. I'm just wondering, the report says that the building does not have the capacity to do anything else, but what is the objective evidence that's been presented to suggest that's the case? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Purvis. So yes, the supplementary guidance which is used to interpret the application of Policy 19 of LDP2 gives further advice on the conversion or replacement of traditional non-domestic buildings, which is the category that we've assessed this application under. So the purpose of that part of the policy is to encourage the retention of such buildings, to allow them to be reused for housing if an alternative employment proposal or use can't be found. So they are intertwined. So you are correct that there is a requirement within that policy ordinarily that in cases such as this, that the demonstration needs to be made as to whether an alternative use, such as an employment use, can be appropriate. In the assessment of the planning application, it's obviously been touched on through the previous planning application and the pre-application consultation. A lot of discussion in terms of the building and its condition has been considered. So the policy gives further information about as to whether the buildings are redundant and whether they're fit for purpose or they're likely to be surplus. We're entirely satisfied that given the condition and appearance of the building, the close proximity to the residential properties, the fact that estate can't usefully use the building given its limitations, and also as it's been vacated lately, we're quite satisfied that it's no longer fit for purpose. So in cases like this where a proposal for conversion comes forward, the supplementary guidance does indicate that some evidence needs to be required, but we do have to take that guidance proportionately and apply it to the case that we have in front of us. If we are of a position that actually it's been used for storage for the estate, it's an agricultural building, it could return to that, but require quite a degree of intervention, and therefore presenting it to a market in the condition that it currently is, and given its proximity to the residential properties, we didn't think it was proportionate or reasonable to push that matter in any great detail. We are accepting that it's no longer fit for purpose, and on that basis proceeded to assess it against Category 5.
Okay, thank you. So just a final point of clarification then, even though it has not been marketed and hypothetically someone might be willing to purchase a property to convert it in the same way, well, not the same way, but convert it as we're going to do for a residential property should this be approved, that's not an absolute requirement of the policy, is what you're saying under the supplementary guidance.
Well, the supplementary guidance does say in all cases it needs to be demonstrated that it's no longer capable of its current use, or it can't be used for an alternative employment use. So in answer to the earlier question, it comes down to a matter of being fit for purpose and whether it's appropriate. So on this occasion, it wasn't considered necessary to go through an abortive marketing exercise, given the fact that it obviously has extreme limitations in what it can be used for. And indeed, I don't think we'd be necessarily encouraging of an employment use to come forward within such close proximity to the dwellings. I think it's obviously been used ad hoc for storage for the estate and agricultural purposes, and I think reference has been made to a roofing contractor. So that's either an agricultural use, so it could be used for anything that falls under agriculture, or part of it potentially could be used for something of a storage nature. So class 6 is of the use class order is storage and distribution. And I think whilst that might have been a fairly low-key use historically, I don't think we would necessarily be encouraging of a proposal coming forward for a class 6 use in all its intents and purposes, which would be to have it used as a base or a hub for storage, which might see an increase in activity, traffic and noise, etc. It wouldn't be the case that necessarily that use would be of a low-key nature that we had before. So getting back to the point, we've decided that we're satisfied that its use is no longer fit for purpose and what it was intended to be used for.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you for that. Right, the second question on a different matter was about the windows and the fact that there's been a change and the windows are now being replaced on the side closest to the other building with skylights. There was an assertion made by the objector that later on, if this application were to be approved and it were built, then under permitted development regulations, those windows could be installed. So there's two parts to the question. First, is that correct? And secondly, if it is correct, is there a way of conditioning this application to prevent such permitted development, which would clearly circumvent the aim of having those windows being replaced with skylights?
Yep, thanks for the question. So yeah, the skylights are a design solution in terms of the amenity, so they're part of the proposal that we consider to be appropriate. In terms of permitted development, there are quite a wide range of permitted development rights that would be available to a house as and when this, if this proposal were to proceed and be built. So it would either be the case that alterations could be made to the building under permitted development rights. Normally, it would be a case of deciding whether it materially alters the external appearance, and whether that's a matter of development. It likely would or could be. So if members were minded that the preservation of no windows being placed on that elevation, it could be something that could be subject to a condition. But I think it's more likely that it would require planning permission if it was to affect the external appearance of the building. Therefore, a condition wouldn't be necessary.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barnacle, I think you have a question.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I'm generally in favour of steadying conversions in the countryside if they fit policy. And I think, looking at the slides, the buildings proposed for renovation are not in a good place. So it's probably a good project to consider for housing in the countryside. But I'm just wondering, there's an element of, there was an assertion made by Mr. Dimmock that we were really talking about almost new build rather than conversion. So I'm just wanting to ascertain, is all the stone that's there going to be utilised in the proposed reconstruction? Are we talking about retaining as much stone as possible? There won't be any surplus stone that couldn't be used in the final construction reconstruction, shall we say? That's my question.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you for the question, Councillor Barnacle. So yeah, it is our understanding and our acceptance that this is a conversion, but through that we do accept there will be a high degree of change, as indicated, I think, by a number of people previously given deputations. The policy does allow for adaptations insofar as they're reasonably necessary to make the conversion successful. So part of that would be removal of some of the material which are no longer capable of being used, such as the timber. You would get repointing and potentially some structural underpinning, etc. Our understanding, again, though, in terms of the stone, is that the stone that's there, the expectation is that that would be used as part of the new proposal. Indeed, that's quite important in order to ensure that the building as adapted harmonises with its environment, to make sure it's an appropriate, design and high quality design that we consider it to be. So that would be our expectation, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I haven't seen any more questions come through as we've been going through what we've had. So I propose we now move to the debate position, and we're looking for a motion now, please. So I haven't done one this morning, so I'm prepared to put a motion forward to move the paper as is. This is an application which brings redundant buildings into use, which, looking from the photographs, not only are in a poor state of repair, but could be quite dangerous. I'm therefore prepared to move the paper as is an opportunity to bring those buildings into good use. Thank you. And Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Deputy Convener. Yeah, here we go again. Another fairly simple one, I would have thought. This is a series of buildings which are being used for a fairly sedentary, if you like, use, that is static storage for not particularly valuable materials, perhaps, in view of the state of the buildings. Surely conversion of these buildings, which have been subject to most of the questioning, conversion of these buildings into a dwelling house, 6.5 metres, I think it was, from existing houses, is surely a far better compromise than Mr. Sheriff or anyone else being free to use these buildings for agricultural purposes. Say a chicken, put some chickens in it, put some pigs in it. Anything like that is quite eligible for such a building, because that's exactly what they are. They're farm buildings. So surely to goodness, any argument that says this should not be a house because of it was used for storage is a piece of nonsense, frankly. And I just see this as a very good compromise for use of these buildings in that vicinity where there are other dwellings similarly converted. I have no hesitation in seconding this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any amendments? Nope. Therefore, the application is approved. Thank you, members. And we will move on to the last one of the day at the moment for that application. This is going to be introduced to us by Mrs. Conliffe. This is the erection of 3 houses and garages on land southwest of Aquila, Breaker Road, Comrie. So I'll hand over to Mrs. Conliffe.
Thank you, Vice Convener. The proposal involves the erection of 3 dwelling houses on a site located at the southern entrance to Comrie. This aerial shot shows the settlement of Comrie, and you can see that the site is located at the southern approach to Comrie from the Braco area on the B827. The settlement boundary of Comrie, as identified within the local development plan, runs along the southern boundary of the application site. It's clear from this aerial shot that the site is existing residential development to the north, to the west and to the east, with open farmland to the south. This site layout plan shows a triangular shaped site, and the proposal is to erect 3 detached dwelling houses on the site. 1 new access is proposed from Braco Road to the west of the site, which will then serve all 3 dwelling houses. As can be seen from the plan, the plots are all generous with adequate space for parking, turning and amenity ground. This first photograph is looking southward across the southern end of the site for plot 1 and towards agricultural land beyond. The existing beech hedge, which is on the southern boundary that you can see, will be supplemented by further beech hedging on the western boundary along the frontage of the public road. This image is taken from the south, looking north and eastwards from Braco Road, looking across plots 1 and 2 and then on to plot 3 in the north. Again, the existing beech hedging can be seen between the plots, and it is proposed to create new beech hedging as part of the proposal along the frontage of all the plots to Braco Road. The single-storey properties of Langside Drive can be seen to the north and east. The proposed new access to the B827, which will serve all 3 plots, just comes in about 20 metres from that 30-mile-an-hour sign that you see there. This final photograph is taken from the northwestern corner of the site, looking in a southerly direction from plot 3 across all 3 plots and back to where the first photo was taken. The full extent of the application site is clear from this point, showing the curve in the road and the open nature to the road frontage. As previously stated, beech hedging is proposed for this frontage, along with more tree planting, and it's considered that with the proposed traditional design, the proposal can provide an attractive development at the entrance to Comrie from the south. This is the elevational plan for both plots 1 and 2, showing a 4-bedroom property. The property proposed for plot 3 is similar in style, but is slightly smaller by about 30 square metres and accommodates a 3-bedroom property rather than 4 bedrooms. All 3 dwelling houses are of a traditional design being 1.5 storey with the upper floor provided for by traditional dormers. Finishing materials for the 3 plots are the same: a slated roof with natural stone and horizontal timber cladding to the walls, and all 3 properties have a detached single garage proposed, again with a slated roof and horizontal timber cladding to the walls to match the proposed dwelling houses. That concludes the stills, Vice Convener, and we're now back to the site layout plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Conliffe. Now, before we proceed, I believe we have Jude Carter online, the agent for the applicant. There's no deputation to be made, but questions will be answered if we have any. I'm assuming that Jude Carter's on the line. Maybe not.
Vice Convener, she doesn't appear to be in the meeting. I'll just seeing she's not, excuse me, she's not called into the meeting, so
right.
It'll be up to yourself whether you.
We'll press on there. We can't just keep going backwards and forwards all the time. So, members, I'll open this up now to questions for officers. All right. Oh, Councillor Barnacle.
Thanks, Convener. Just looking at the site history, we start off with 1 house and then 3 approvals for erection of 1 house, and then more recently an approval for the erection of 2 houses, and now we're talking about 3. So these previous approvals obviously weren't carried out, and so we've gone from 1 to 3. So are the planning department happy that the site is not being overdeveloped, and it's simply that the previous permissions were not carried out? Is that correct?
Yes. Mrs. Conliffe?
Yes, Councillor Barnacle, that is correct. I mean, you would see from the photographs which have been relatively recently taken that there is no sign of any development having started on any of the plots. As you're aware, we have to look at everything on its own merits, and you can see from the site plan that's up on the screen at the moment that clearly it complies with our policies in terms of placemaking, in terms of the plot ratio, and it is also very similar to the plot ratio that we have surrounding the site, and therefore on that basis we are satisfied that 3 is a suitable number on this plot.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. And in the light of no further questions, Councillor Gray, again, you want to put a motion forward. You've earned your money this morning. Councillor Gray.
Absent for a moment now.
Yep.
Yep. There were 2 issues here that came up. One was the fact that they were effectively 2-storey with bedrooms in the roof and overlooking was suspected. That has been proven to be not the case. There are no windows facing east towards the other bungalows, and the other issue was the roads, and the roads are being approved to be fit with slight modification to the road furniture, etc., to make sure they retain the safety of that vicinity. No hesitation but approve. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Reid.
Happy to second the motion.
Thank you very much. Doesn't appear to be any amendments coming through. I'll open up for any comments if anybody has any. None of those either. That was a very quick one. Paper's been approved. Thank you very much, members. Which now leads us on to the last 2 items, which are the 2 pans. As you know, these are opportunities for councillors to put their concerns forward to officers. The first one of the 2, 431, is again a formation of an energy storage facility of control building, battery storage, container units and ancillary equipment in Braco. Are there any points that you wish to raise for officers? Councillor James.
Yeah, thanks, Vice Convener. It's similar. I take it this is similar to the one that was going up near Noah's Ark, which we had a pan for a few weeks ago, and I'd say the same again for this one. Please take into consideration access for fire and also security of the site, please. Thank you.
Mr. Scott, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just understood that initially the question was coming, but I think it's been answered by the question. It is very similar in nature insofar as it's container units for battery storage and ancillary equipment. So yeah, some of the similar considerations would apply.
Thank you very much, both of you. There's no other questions coming through. So we'll leave that pan and we go to the next one.
I've put it in as a comment, Convener.
Oh, it hasn't come through yet. Okay. Fine, go ahead, Councillor Wilson.
Just to say on similar lines to Councillor James, I'm on page 115, Convener, para 17, and we're asked to emphasise anything we think is really important, and exactly right. There may be more of these, of course, because that's the way things are going to go in the future. So I think 17E, relationship to nearby land uses, is important. And obviously the natural, and F, the natural heritage and ecology and landscape, that's F and G. And transport implications, especially during construction period, because it's a narrow road. And the roads around about there's folk in the room that are much better knowledge than me of that, but I know the area a wee bit, and the particularly the protection of roads and road safety in the construction period, I think, is particularly important. I think these were the main points I wanted to raise. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Deputy Convener again. Yeah, this site is actually with the substation, very absolutely adjacent to the Bewley-Denny power line, which went through some years ago. It is within a forested area. There is good access to it because the substation is adjacent to it, and good access was provided not only to the substation but previously to the power line itself. So I look forward to seeing this coming forward as a full application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's been no further requests for comment, so again we'll move on to the final pan, number 432. This is a proposal for a mixed-use development comprising hotel, museum, holiday accommodation, retail and potential park and ride facility, Caledonian House and land at West Kinfauns Holdings, West Kinfauns. Councillors, do we have any comments on this one, please?
Convener.
Councillor Wilson, yep. You've muted yourself.
Sorry. Too many buttons to press. I'll defer to Councillor Simpson, who can work the system a lot better than me, but if I could make a comment later on, it'll save me having to type in this daft wee box at the bottom.
Okay, Councillor Simpson.
But not often beat Councillor Wilson to the post, Convener. Thank you very much. I just had one comment to make, really in relation to an item mentioned in paragraph 1 and also later on page 125. I'd like to see a bit more information when we come to consider this on the park and ride facility. I'm a great fan of what I would call real park and rides like Broxdem, which is a number of facilities, but I'm not so keen on the ones such as the one we have in Scoon, which is more a car park in a field with a very occasional bus, which I don't see adding to sustainability. And I do struggle with a park and ride at this point to see how they're going to get you into Perth any quicker than any other method. So I think that is one issue that I would like to see addressed very clearly, although it may not be for the applicant to operate. I think to find out whether it's going to be what I would describe as a real park and ride would be very interesting.
Thank you very much. And back to you, Councillor Wilson.
Convener, thank you for your forbearance and my lack of technical skills. I'm on page 125 and then going on to 126 for ease of reference. This is a key site. I mean, it's one of the most iconic views in Perth and Kinross. It's the Rhine, or our version of it. with the castle. So the visual impact and the view from Canoe Hill must be taken into account in regard with any development. And I think also the scale, design and layout of that must come into sharp feature. I think going over the page to 17C, the relationship with nearby land uses and the benefits to residents of the local settlement. Confound is a difficult area for public transport. There'll be others in the room that know more about that than me, but it is. And I think that the water resources and soils and the River Tay SAC, I think is important given the very, very close proximity to the site, to the river. It's a few feet above river level and sea level. And I think Councillor Simpson beat me to the, I beat him with 1 or 2 questions today, but he beat me to the one comment about the park and ride. This can't just be tokenism. This must be a realistic way of getting park and ride facilities from the east developed for our city. And the challenge is going to be on how, not building it, but how we service it and provide good connectivity. And also how this can link in through, I'm surprised Councillor Simpson didn't mention this, cycling and walking into the city centre, as well as the obvious benefits of people leaving their car there and taking a shuttle bus in. It won't be served simply by the number 16 going in once an hour. That's not going to work, right? But that's an operational matter. And I think under 18, the 5th bullet point down, I think is transport assessment is also very important. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, both of you. There's no further comments coming through. So with that, as the last item, I will propose to close the meeting. Thank you all very much for your contributions this morning. I will see you all again next month.